Demarri Dosunmu is a second-year undergrad, double majoring in computer science and math from Tennessee. His interests are computer science, mathematics, physics, philosophy, classical piano repertoire, anthropology, psychology, political debate, and present.
Thank you. All right, so yes, I am Demarri. This is a paper I wrote like a year ago for class Freedom of the Will and Moral Responsibility. It was taught by Libertarianism, who is now, she retired last year. But yeah, I hopefully remember as much as possible about all the studies I looked at. But I also have to present it in like a year and a half, so that's also there. But yes, only libertarianism coheres with the common self. So first is exigency. Why does anyone care? I drew up this cute example of a situation. Say I'm at a birthday party. The cake is cut into equal slices, and obviously you're supposed to get one slice each. But I take more than I'm supposed to. My mom notices. Obviously, she's gonna be upset with me if she's a good mother. And when she does this, she appeals to my moral intuitions about fairness and accountability, right? It was my decision to take more cake than was allowed to me. But by the same intuitions, if it had turned out, or I told her that like my father told me to take 2 pieces, the blame suddenly shifts toward the father instead of me. Or it's not entirely away from me, but it is more equally distributed. So then the issue of free will, there are many different accounts of like a definition of free will provided by different philosophers from different camps. But one thing that tends to go overlooked is, okay, can these definitions properly map onto how we use the term free will in language and how we make sense of moral intuitions, right? I mean, we can define free will to be whatever we want, but if it doesn't coincide with the way we actually make moral judgments, these kind of things are kind of morally useless. So it's important to investigate which positions can cohere with our moral intuitions, because if not, we might be adopting a particular view of free will that just does not help us in any way more. So in order to show my future point, first we'll talk about the positions in the free will debate, which there are numerous, but I'll condense it. I'll talk about how religion has shaped the idea of free will, as well as how we can identify how we treat the idea of free will and the self in human language, primarily English. Also talk about natural selection and evolution and how that can shape our minds to have a particular idea of the self. And finally, I will analyze a bunch of all the different positions to figure out which of them actually cohere with a proper definition of the self. All right, so here's a table of the positions in the freedom of will debate. This is not typically how you might see it. I wanted to give a more granular account. For libertarianism, which is also known as incompatibilism, obviously, can we have free will with determinism? You say no. Popular holders of these are Van Wagen, Chisholm, Kane, and also Kant, but Kant, like usual, is very weird. You could honestly also put like Nietzsche in here, but it's also a complicated thing. For hard determinism, which is just, everything is determined, so there's definitely no free will. Obviously, you say no free will. Only person who really holds this that's like super significant, I guess, is Spinoza. I don't know about it too much because I looked at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. There are also like other people who hold this nowadays, but you don't see it as much. You typically see soft determinism, which is also known as compatibilism, where you say, yes, even though we might be in a determined world, we can still have free will. Some popular holders of these are Leibniz, the rationalist, Frankfurt, Dennett, John Fisher, David Lewis, Hilary Bach, who is now retired, P.F. Strawson, and ours truly, Dr. Ishmael. And then there's also this, I wanted to give like a clear distinction, I guess. A lot of compatibilists do say you do need like determinism as well for free will, which is a result of the Van objection, which we'll discuss later. But people who are specifically advocates of this opinion under compatibilism are Hobbes, Hume, Smart, and J.J. Iyer. Yeah. And then finally, you have impossibilism or hard compatibilism, which is really saying that free will itself as an idea is incoherent. So it doesn't really matter if we have determinism or not, we just don't have free will. And the clear proponents of these are Galen Strawson and Greg Peregrine. All right, so religion and spiritualism. All right, so in these three very large religions, or four, sorry, in Christianity and Judaism, you can look towards Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, where man is created in the image of God and after his likeness. This is called Imago Dei. And it's, in scholarship, this is referred to a received, derived form of agency and moral responsibility. Obviously, it's not the same as God's, but humankind inherits a lesser version of these qualities from God, as supposedly he makes them in his image. Yes. So yes, then in Islam, with the Quran, you have the term nafs, which refers literally to the soul, ego, and the self. The story goes that there's a trust that was given by Allah to humans that was not, it was rejected by like the mountains and hills and valleys, etc. And this trust itself is a faculty of uncaused agency. And essentially what this means is that humans are uniquely responsible for answering to Allah for moral qualities. So yeah, that's the Quran and also some scholarship. Then we also have Hinduism, where you have the Atman, which represents the true eternal self, which underlies and transcends material psychology. It pre-exists and is independent of all physical and mental processes. It's also important to note that the Atman is equated with the Brahman, which is the fundamental reality. So effectively, all humans have this sort of fundamental connection which pre-exists these material causal chains. And yeah, some scholarship for that as well. Okay, and we also have agnosticism and atheism, just things that aren't particularly religious. You have spirits, hauntings, and ghosts, right? These are immaterial consciousness, which subsists posthumously. So even if you die, you might have a ghost that just wanders around or can inhabit objects. But even in that, you maintain your identity, right? It's like this sort of truer version of the self where even though your body is gone, you still subsist, and it's really you. It's that same identity. We also have the idea of reincarnation, which is some kind of core identity which can live in different bodies with different memories, but somehow that process is responsibility tracking. Like you might say, perhaps I'm being punished for something that I did in a previous life. So even though you might have different memories, you still have this kind of moral responsibility and agency which can go with you throughout different bodies because you maintain your core identity. Finally, we have animism, which is basically just spirits being in places, objects, or forces. So in the idea that like you shouldn't hurt trees, or I guess maybe you shouldn't abuse dolls. I don't know. But yeah, this is like basically, I mean, destroying plant life is immoral in the same way that like hurting a person is. And you find this very, very often in pre-literate societies, according to some scholarship. So the general trend there is obviously there's some kind of immaterial and subsisting identity or consciousness, which is independent of bodies. And the question then becomes, are these spirits uncaused? Is their behavior determined by something outside of them, or are they agent causal? So yes, even if someone believes in immaterial spirits, you can still say that laws are being applied to them. But then the question becomes, what would these laws be? I mean, you can say like, I don't know, every soul has to have at least 2 thoughts. I don't know, something very, very abstract and nonsensical. But the question then becomes, okay, why? Or how would you even know that to be true, right? We have a social construction of such spirits, like we don't see them empirically and do tests on them. So they're completely absolved of any empirical rule checks. So unlike the ideas of like electromagnetism or gravity, we can't just say there is a pattern in behavior that we cannot find a way to, I guess, undo, and then derive a rule from there. We also get we also see that the immaterial consciousness that we see in like spirits are very similar to religious accounts. It seems like there's the same underlying intuition. You can ask yourself, if people all over the world believe in spirits, and in the case of formalization of something by an organized religion, so a holy book, you ascribe agent causation to them, then the convergence of agent causal accounts suggests a shared intuition regardless of religious status. This is basically saying, regardless of whether you're like a devout religious person or more so, a spiritualist, if both of you share the idea of an immaterial spirit which contains an identity, it's very likely that the underlying intuition is the same. Obviously, you can rewrite religion to not have agent causal powers, but the fact that people accepted it even so indicates a shared intuition for the same general idea of agent causation. So yeah, you can also ask, like, just counterfactually, how likely is it that humans from different cultures and societies have the same conception of spirits if they do not share the intuition? Very unlikely. Okay, now we'll look at language. We also have the common counterfactual of if I were. So yes, common language can help us reveal assumptions about the world that we make by what we don't question when we talk to people. And for our purposes, we'll look at the self-counterfactual. So basically, when we do a self-counterfactual, we ask our audience to imagine a reality where our physical existence is different. So yes, the question then becomes, okay, what is that physical difference? Like, what is the part of me that's, I guess, remaining constant? Why is it still me? If we assume that this is only the body, then something like if I were born differently would be a clear misuse of speech, because then you just wouldn't be talking about the same person anymore. There must be something else that's underlying that psychology, that physicality. You could even add mental content like memories or personality traits. But even so, we run into the issue like, okay, if I were my mathematics professor, for example, we wouldn't have a perspective change. And what I mean by that is, well, I need to actually be in the body of my professor, not just apply my mental content of like memories, beliefs, etc. to the professor. I have to actually be there. And what this requires is, again, some kind of soul or spirit, some immaterial substance which can exist in different bodies. And it's very, very closely aligned with the previous section. Right? Then I can say, if I were my mathematics professor, I would treat the class better, and I would use my intelligence for good. So this way I can get the mental content of intelligence from the professor, as well as, yes, I have the ability to do whatever things I want in the professor's body. And then, yes, so we also know that this is genuinely intelligible because it is the premise of lots of media and research. So you obviously have like Freaky Friday, but you also have later movies like Body Swap or 17 Again, and then you even have perceptual research. So yes, very well understood. This is a sort of assumption that we don't typically say explicitly, but we use it all the time and do not question it. Okay, now I will talk about evolution and particularly natural selection. So the theory of natural selection is basically that genetic mutations and birth conditions might improve an organism's chance of reproduction, and as a result, organisms with phenotypes toward reproduction replicate their genes at rates higher than those who have not those same phenotypes. Naturally, this also applies to mental selection. So aspects of the human mind are also shaped by natural selection. And this is quite similar to what Darwin called instincts in The Origin of Species. Basically, a bunch of ants, and ants do have like concepts of like warfare and like positions of power. But anyway, so yeah, a case study for us specifically is morality. So the ideas of good, bad, evil, being deserving of something, not only are these universal, but the idea that they are sort of non-negotiable and like almost a part of reality we see this everywhere, even between isolated groups. And consequently, we can understand that morality basically guides human behavior towards pro-social behavior. So, I mean, the sharing of resources, bonds, and yes, I didn't mention it here, but I mean, yeah, social bonds, etc., are good for like mental health, and they overall increase like life expectancy. So yes, morality in guiding human behavior increases the probability of reproduction, and we also see that brain studies can show how disorders like narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder are associated with elective activation in certain brain regions which are responsible for empathy, which is critical to moral behavior. So clearly there's some physical existence of morality in the brain. And this shows that natural selection had a part. The question then becomes, why humans specifically? Why do we only assign moral weight and responsibility to humans as opposed to things like rocks or planets? Obviously, there's the small thing of like, okay, well, for animals, we do have some idea of morality, like we shouldn't torture them, but we still don't apply the same ideas of strict responsibility to animals. Now, if this is to make logical sense, then it must be that humans have some kind of special quality. It must be that whatever that quality is, it makes us more interested in investigating what happens in the human versus what happens in their environment. Otherwise, we could just look at the environment and know everything we need to know. Now, if this is the ability to generate a will or a behavior which is independent of other variables around them, then humans would consider such a will or such a behavior cardinal. This is the result of temporal induction, right? If, in the case of the cake, yes, if I am the one who effectively generates the will to make, or to eat more cake than is assigned to me, then my mother understands that there's something, I suppose, in me that is doing this immoral thing versus whether when she knows it's my father, it doesn't come from within me. So she's effectively looking to the source of this action. And yes, depending on whether my father coerced me or not, it shifts. So yes, this also strengthens morality. Humans would be uniquely responsible for the downstream results of their actions. We would also have higher pro-social behavior and also higher chances of reproduction. And then also, if this sort of thing that causes the will is separate from the body, the material, then an empathetic counterfactual becomes possible. We already saw how the idea of empathy was very important to morality. Like we can now ask questions, how would I feel if I were them? It doesn't just mean to just have whatever feelings they're having, but experience life as they experience it. We also get the idea of recoverability, which is basically that even if someone is subject to manipulation or illness, even if that describes their current and future behavior, we have the idea of, well, we can correct it. It's effectively a flawed expression of their true will. It's not actually how they would behave under different conditions. And yeah, there's a lot of empirical support for this idea. You have this semi-famous Schooler and Wells paper from 2008, where volunteers read a passage which argued for determinism, and then on a later test, or a math test that people took, participants cheated nearly twice as often compared to a control group on a later test, suggesting that belief in determinism weakens moral accountability. There was a study that, I guess, questioned these findings from 2020 by Inalofer et al. It argued that the effects of deterministic priming on immoral behavior, such as cheating, they might not be as strong as was suggested, and might depend on very subtle experimental conditions. We also have some other studies, such as Baumeister et al., where participants were primed with deterministic ideas, had increased aggression, and they were less willing to help people, compared to those who were primed with libertarian beliefs. We also have Stillman et al., where employees who self-reported stronger beliefs in libertarian accounts of free will had better job performance, better job performance ratings, and they also had more positive career attitudes. You also have even later research in 2017 and 2019 where deterministic beliefs negatively impacted well decision making in different contexts, although they were of different magnitudes. Finally, I will do a short analysis of each of the positions. So obviously with libertarianism, classically, if determinism is true, no one can act otherwise than he does. This is Demarri Dosunmu from 1983. We can see this expressed through many ways, especially in philosophy, like an unmoved mover, a prime mover, or an uncaused cause. Some even say like a imminent or imminent causation. We already see that this is very coherent with religion, folklore, and spirits, or we have something that's immaterial, it's uncaused, has no physical bearing on sorts of laws. And we can really say that libertarianism is just an account of the layman or common account of the self, right? We get natural significance and moral responsibility from understanding an agent causal structure as opposed to a completely deterministic structure where everything before determines everything after. Okay. In hard determinism, obviously we have that all events are in a causal structure. We already say that free will does not exist, which is quite obviously incompatible with how people typically see the world. It's incompatible with religion, and it imposes laws upon the socially constructed souls, which has no empirical background. We also have no non-practical reason to investigate human wills. We can't say for any metaphysical reason like we should be looking at human wills because we can just look at the genes and the environment they came from. It sort of reduces morality to just a practical thing, but not an actual thing, which is not how people see morality. We also have impossibilism, which just says that free will is incoherent, which is obviously directly incompatible with agent causal account of souls and spirits that are given by religion and folklore. So not much to discuss there. Finally, we have compatibilism. Basically, it says that free will and determinism are not logically contradictory. So yeah, I'd put it in argument form. So you have free will that's exhibited by itself. Intuitive self is immaterial and not subject to deterministic laws. Determinism requires that all objects be subject to deterministic laws. Hence, any self-incompatibilism must be subject to deterministic laws. Therefore, the intuitive self cannot exist in compatibilism. So, yes, compatibilism does contradict the common account of the self given by spirits, folklore, religion, all the studies, language. Some compatibilists would try to add some flexibility to the layman's account by saying you build character over time. Now, obviously, this will map well into our idea of like reflexes and automatic reactions, but this would still be contradictory to the intuitive self as an agent having ability, since, I mean, it would still be the case that the past determines the present completely. You wouldn't be able to do more than act by the personality that was already built. You also have nuance given by accounts by Frankfurt and Fisher, where you have the alignment of desires or guidance control, but these are also victims to bypassing, which we'll see next. So yes, bypassing or hijacking is effectively the idea of, okay, well, being programmed or someone jumping in, I guess, and rewriting someone's desires. So yeah, one study by Nichols and Oak in 2007, only 70% of individuals held that an agent who fully existed in a deterministic universe were responsible in an abstract scenario. But then responsibility judgments rose above 70% when even just a small amount of uncaused agency was introduced. We also have Woolfolk, Doris, and Darley from 2006, where having a murderer's desires be inserted by outside manipulation will decrease greatly the amount of blame that participants put on that person. And this is also supported by the comprehension of determinism in 5 pre-registered replications. This is also an AO offer from 2023. So in conclusion, we get incoherence, right? But let me explain first. So the Reynolds objection is basically that, okay, well, if you have an uncaused agency, then the things that you do are not reasoned, right? It would have to be the case that your reasons, your beliefs, your character traits, and your desires determine what you do, otherwise it would be arbitrary, right? And then that's just not genuine agency. But even so, that the idea that the will begins in agents makes them the unique origin for such a will and the later events makes them uniquely responsible, and that gives us an intuitive basis for moral responsibility. And as a result, natural selection has created an account for reproductive utility, even though it doesn't have logical consistency. But the practical coherence of libertarianism effectively outweighs the logical coherence of determinism. So even though we have something that's not logical, it doesn't make sense, it is what natural selection imbued us with because it caused us to produce more and spread genes. And that's it. Questions?
Hi, thanks, Demarri. That's really interesting. I guess I have a clarificatory question, and then I maybe have a more substantive question. So was I interpreting you right that you were taking the evolutionary considerations to support libertarianism?
Support in what way? Like,
provide evidence for, give us reason to believe.
it's okay. Well, I'm saying that natural selection effectively, in having having a default sense of libertarianism, is more toward reproduction. As a result, is better for spreading genes. So it's not that like natural selection is saying that libertarianism is genuinely viable or an actual account of reality,
I see.
but just rather that, okay, that's how we engineer the brain. It's similar to how, I mean, we have cognitive biases, and these are added by natural selection. Obviously, they're not logical, but they help us survive.
I see. Right. So you're intending to be neutral on the metaphysical question of free will there.
Yes.
Okay. Maybe I'll ask the follow-up anyway. Because I think, at least for a lot of people, when they start reflecting on the evolution of morality, they're sort of struck by this sort of debunking argument that you might be drawn to, which totally agrees with the evolutionary story that you told, and then notes that that might be a good explanation of why we have these kind of beliefs, whether or not they're true. And so the fact that we believe them maybe doesn't give us any reason to think that they're true, because they're just the sort of beliefs that we'd expect to pop out of an evolutionary process because it helps with group selection or whatever. And so, at least a lot of people are inclined to think that actually provides an undercutting defeater for libertarianism. So they're like, they agree with the evolutionary story, and then say, and that's a reason to doubt libertarianism. So I'm just interested to hear, do you like that sort of argument? If not, maybe why not?
Yeah. I mean, it makes me. I'm reading Nietzsche right now. I mean, yeah, it's like, I mean, you don't even really need, I guess, this specifically. You don't even need to look at like evolution to say, I mean, or to begin to question, I mean, things like morality. I mean, you can just say, okay, well, just because I have these feelings does not mean they represent reality, or there's something actually out there that I can measure or have some super sensibility for. I think me personally, I'm particularly silent on the issue of metaphysics, because I feel like you can't really do anything there. But I mean, yeah, I guess I am sympathetic to the notion that, I mean, yeah, these things are arbitrary. The sort of values that we say are genuinely true and have some real reality. But I don't think that particular argument is necessary for it.
Cool, thanks.
Alex?
I'm curious, so I guess like how I'm reading this, which you can correct me if I'm wrong, is like not really an argument for or against determinism being a more logical description of how things work, because it seems like you're kind of on the same page that determinism is it was more logically consistent and explains the universe better. But I'm curious why you don't think it matters that we believe things that are more true. Like humans like to believe true things or feel like it's, we have some bias towards trying to believe true things, right? Or like maybe you can't even convince yourself to believe something that you think is untrue. Why can't we just say do you want us to just say okay, determinism is more logically consistent, but libertarianism is instrumentally useful, so let's all just convince ourselves that libertarianism is correct so we can act morally. But then again, if determinism is true and you say that means that we don't have any moral responsibility, then why should we care if determinism means that we don't have moral responsibility? If that's true, great, we don't have moral responsibility. So I guess that's two questions. One, why do we care about assigning people moral responsibility if kind of the premise assumes that one is true? And then two, why don't you care about believing things that are true?
Okay. I'll do your second question first. About humans believing things are true, is one characterization. I wouldn't say people are inclined to believe things that are true. I think they're inclined to feel that they believe that things are true.
Or would prefer to believe things are true. No?
They prefer believing things that they believe are true. So, the human brain, the idea of okay, well, truth is good, is obviously, is, a virtue or a moral. But it does come from a place of feeling, I feel that truth is important. But you can also have other feelings that sort of meddle with that, particularly cognitive dissonance. It might be true that something about, the way you were raised was not actually good, but you were imbued with believing it was good, so you always constantly resist arguments toward it, for example. Because you have one feeling of truth that's trying to fight another, but you also have the feeling of, well, my upbringing was good. So it's not exactly that humans believe that, or humans prefer truth, it's that they prefer a set of feelings and truth is among them, but it's not necessarily always the top one. Sorry, what was your first question again?
Why, if determinism is true and that gives us moral responsibility, there is no such thing as moral responsibility, then why do we care about preferring libertarianism to maximize moral responsibility in the first place?
Why do we care? I'm sort of confused by your question. Are you asking why?
I guess I'm a determinist. I'm willing to bite the bullet on there's no such thing as moral responsibility. Whatever, who cares? Why then should I if you are a determinist, why is this argument appealing to you, or what's the pitch? Because if you're not already buying that moral responsibility matters and therefore libertarianism is true, how do I get to preferring libertarianism to determinism if I'm already willing to say that how do you justify moral responsibility without libertarianism as a reason to prefer libertarianism?
You can make up your own theory of moral responsibility. The problem is moral responsibility is a social construct, and it comes from an incoherent idea given by natural selection. So you coming up with a new moral responsibility is not necessarily relevant to what other people are going to talk about when they say moral responsibility. It's how would you interact with a contradictory system? You sort of don't, or I'm not opposed. I still act as if I don't really think about like stuff like this. I just act as if, I mean, morals still matter to me, of course, and I pretty much treat people and myself the same as before I knew about the debate versus I didn't. I don't think it really matters too much. People will behave morally regardless because it's a very good feeling. So I don't really think there is a particular motivation for leaving one camp or joining another. I think it's more so, it is fun to create models of compatibilism.
Do you disagree with the studies that you presented then?
Disagree with them? What do you mean?
Like about how they're presenting people with the idea of determinism change their, like, I don't know if it actually influenced what they thought, but at least like influenced their actions. Do you think that's not true? Like whether or not we believe in determinism actually can't affect our actions, because either way we'll be moral people. Like the studies you showed seem to show the opposite.
Oh, I see what you mean. I mean, I think like on an abstract theory sense, like even if we were able to prove that the whole world is deterministic, people would still behave morally for the most part, I think, because I mean, you still go about your everyday life. I mean, in the studies, obviously, it's a very particular focus on this philosophical issue. But I mean, living your life, you are not always going to be thinking about philosophy. I think if you want to say that, but yeah, it should be particularly inconsequential to the way people act, regardless of whether they end up believing determinism or libertarianism. As in, like, okay, obviously they will admit that like it's logically incoherent, but they will say, I would rather live in a world where we encourage pro-social behavior versus submit to some kind of moral anarchy. Lana?
I have a question that's like slightly related, but like a little unrelated. But thank you for your presentation. It's really, really interesting.
Thank you.
So I haven't done an extensive amount of reading on free will, but I think that my current conception is somewhat compatibilist in that, like, I think that the nature of the world is such that determinism is true, but given that us humans have we just simply do not have the knowledge to like comprehend exactly what's going to happen next. For all intents and purposes, we do have free will. How is that? I think because of that, I'm kind of struggling with your conclusion that like only libertarianism coheres with like our general idea of like the common self and freedom generally. If you like decided to adopt my version of compatibilism, how would that like complicate things?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Oh yeah, that like practical reasoning and theoretical reasoning differently. I don't remember Bach's work too much, but that is sort of the thing that Bach was talking about when in her book, I forgot what it's called. It might have been just Freedom and Responsibility. But yeah, I mean, obviously there's a difference between the metaphysical truth of what is happening in the world versus, okay, what can we actually see as humans? We can say, yeah, on a practical reasoning level, obviously we cannot investigate every single state in the world before a human does something. But even so, the stronger claim that people make when it comes to the self, that it is really not like genes or the environment in their layman account of the self. That is really the theoretical version. It's not just the practical version. It's not just saying like we treat morality as if it were real, even though we know everything is really caused. They're saying that it really is real, whether we like it or not. And it's not just a practical thing, it's a genuine theoretical thing. I mean, you can push back if you would like to.
I mean, okay, just a quick question. So like, I don't think that probability is actually like real. I think it's kind of a tool that we use because we don't know what's going to happen.
I agree.
So that's why we say like chance exists. But you could say that like we talk about probability as though it's like a fundamental theoretical like concept. So like how does that versus morality like change? Like does that make sense? Like what's the difference between probability, the fields of probability and the fields of morality on that?
I'm exactly sure what you're.
Okay, it's fine. I'm not quite sure how.
I mean, okay, in both cases, I mean, you're using induction. Probability is also like a feature of the human mind that we've been evolved to see. There are definitely people who say like probability really is in the world, and then I guess maybe upon like deeper reflection, they'll say it's just a practical consideration. And yes, I mean, freedom or morality in theory falls into that same camp. It's like, okay, we believe it, like, I guess we're by default maybe moral realists or something like this. But then if we investigate it and we're unable to come up with like a proper idea of free will that has logical coherency, we'll be like, okay, well, it's just a practical consideration. It's not a metaphysical truth about the world. Sorry.
If it's all right, I want to return to the argument against compatibilism. We've had like
This argument premise one.
yes, that one.
Oops. No, yeah.
Right. I'm just to make sure I'm understanding you right. I was wondering if you could explain a bit how, given the, I mean you've explained that you're concerned primarily not with the free will in the metaphysical sense, but you know how we're conceiving of the common self. I'm wondering how this argument would go in light of that. If you could just explain for a second. I have a question about it following that.
What do you mean? Sorry. How this would go about
Right.
what specifically? Sorry.
Yeah. So it seems to me that, and I'm going to try and be as precise as possible here, given that I don't know if I fully am
Understand.
right.
It's okay. I use word language.
It's my understanding that the kind of, it seems to me that in this argument, the kind of self that you're talking about may appear at first blush to be talking about the common self that you're talking about as if it were metaphysically real. So I
Yeah, so, I mean,
right.
this is implicitly, I mean, yes, by a self, it means like a noumenal self, not a like phenomenal self, to like use like Kant language. Like my actual self that is like metaphysically existent, it doesn't have bearing on like the physical world in the causal sense, like the physical world doesn't cause the behavior of that self. But obviously, practically, if we were just talking strictly practically, this argument doesn't matter because when we're talking about self, we no longer necessarily mean that it's not subject to deterministic laws. We just begin to say that it's whatever that has character traits, personality, memories, and all of those in combination with the environment completely determine its behavior.
Right. Okay. I guess what I'm struggling a bit to see here is if you're maintaining that your argument only presents a conception of which account coheres more with how we're experiencing free will and moral responsibility, I'm wondering how this, what seems to be a metaphysical takedown of compatibilism with that function.
Are you claiming that like compatibilism is generally like practical? I don't know.
What do you mean by that? Sorry.
Are you saying like? Sorry, can you ask your question again?
Right. Okay. So I'm wondering, given you've explained that your account focuses on the realm of how we're experiencing the self and free will and moral responsibility, not in a metaphysical sense, but in our experience, right? And which account coheres more with how we're experiencing that. I'm wondering then how you would reconcile that separation with what appears here to be a metaphysical account. And then, if that's true, if there is that sort of separation, my broader question is that it appears to me that compatibilist accounts of like agent causation or deep self views may make the very same result that that you think libertarian is such an advantage for. Is that clear?
Sorry, I'm primarily confused by what you're saying when you're saying it's the reasons are primarily grounded in like experience for So
We're in time, so I just want to.
Also, we have time because the people called me and they said they're going to be late.
Okay,
So we
great.
have-
We do have time.
sorry.
Right, okay, I mean, if someone else, I might be struggling to map this, if someone else can.
I think I'm kind of trying to pick up what I think Sarah was trying to put down.
Right.
Something that you said earlier, I don't remember, I think maybe it was in response to Alex's question, is we were talking about like truth as a feeling, right? So like, it seems to be like, even a lot of these accounts that you're talking about how religious beliefs are cohering with some sense of like, well, we have this like religious belief sense, and we have this like, we have empirical results that are seeming to prove that somehow like our beliefs are interacting with like this particular concept of like morality. So like, so there's this thing that belief is doing, right? Or like this like, what I think you talked about the layman's account of the self, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and you have different dimensions in which you're using to describe this layman's account of the self, which seems to be like an issue of belief, right? Like even societal belief, but still determined by a bunch of individuals' beliefs, right? So you have this, we're dealing with this, and like maybe this is the thing that like is giving us a sense of like moral agency. This compatibilism argument, when you're saying, especially like using the intuitive self as immaterial, not subject to deterministic laws, like that's not talking about belief. Like premise 2 in this like takedown of compatibilism is not talking about like human belief, like collective belief or individual belief about free will. It's talking about like a metaphysical, it's making like a metaphysical claim, right? Like the intuitive self is immaterial, not subject to deterministic laws. So like truth is a feeling, maybe, like in an epistemic sense, like you might believe that things are true. But like when Alex was talking about truth, like she was talking about like a metaphysical truth, right? Like that there's like a fact of the matter as to whether or not determinism is true or not. And like, well, in your accounting we didn't believe. So I think what I understood from Sarah's question was, is it like what's the point of even like if the only thing that really matters is what I think is maybe the thrust of what your argument was, is like the thing that really matters is belief, then like a takedown of compatibilism would have to be about compatibilism belief rather than metaphysics of compatibilism.
That's precisely.
Okay, so sorry, how are you understanding premise 2?
That the intuitive self is immaterial, like that's a metaphysical.
Yeah, it comes from, I mean, all the accounts that were given. It's like the common account, the account of the self by the common person is immaterial and not subject to deterministic laws.
Right, but then if you're, so far, you can correct me if I'm being unfair here, so far it seems as though you want to talk about that common self solely in the empirical realm, and not in a metaphysical sense. It seems as though here in premise 2, which I think is what Veronica was saying as well, you're using that self that you've so far maintained to be, to matter in that one sense, now in a metaphysical sense. If you're insisting on separation between the two, it then seems as though you cannot use that evidence in order to support a metaphysical argument.
What do you mean it's switching from empirical to metaphysical?
Is premise 2 a claim about my belief or a claim
It's
about
okay, so it's saying that people generally believe whatever metaphysics concerning the self to be true.
So it's still about belief.
Oh yeah, well, this is not a takedown of compatibilism. It's saying that compatibilism is logically incompatible with the common metaphysical conception of the self.
So like when people are saying that they can hold these two views at the same time, do you not believe them?
I mean, it depends on if. I mean, when I talk to compatibilists, I assume they have particularly different ideas of, the self or responsibility than what people, yes, commonly would come up with to answer that question. It's saying, like when you're redefining free will, you're basically changing the definition of a self. So when you're talking to, people who are like libertarians, you're not really talking about the same self. And people are, yes, generally libertarian. So there's a disconnect between the way compatibilists are talking about more responsibility and the way libertarians are talking about more responsibility. They're using the same term, but because of their different definitions of the self, they're later talking about different things.
No, you seem keen.
I'm always keen.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, so maybe this is just another way of bringing out what I take the conversation to be right now. So if we look at the conclusion of the argument, it says, therefore, the intuitive self cannot exist in compatibilism. I take it there's at least two ways of understanding that claim.
Okay.
So we could think of the intuitive self as a psychological thing, that is, a particular intuition or representation or folk theory about the self. Or we could think of the intuitive self as the content, right? As the putative thing as it exists in the world. And I guess my inclination would be to think that if we construe the intuitive self in the psychological sense, then it can exist in compatibilism.
Oh yeah, naturally. I mean, you can,
And I think most compatibilists are of the view that their view is not the intuitive view, right? They had to do all this philosophical work to figure out so many things. And so that I think is consistent with compatibilism. I think it's maybe correct that if we construe it as the content of that theory, right, like the worldly thing that our folk theory says exists, that is not compatible with compatibilism. But that's the compatibilist view, right? And so it's not, this is, I guess, maybe related to all, I take it this is on the same vein and also related to the sort of debunking thing I was mentioning earlier, like the compatibilists can say, yeah, the folk are wrong about moral responsibility and free will. And then we're going to tell some psychological story about why they got it so messed up. So maybe one way to put it, and I've started going on for too long, but so which way are you intending the conclusion? Or some other way that
it's therefore the metaphysical account.
Yeah.
Just give me a second. Is incompatible with compatibilism. Yeah. There you go.
Unless anyone else has any questions, I'm curious how this, at this point in the discussion, you're going to classify a view like the following, whether you see it as compatibilist or libertarian. But like, of course, in the thousands, they were worried about divine foreknowledge, and so instead of determinism, they'll think like God knowing everything. So like not deterministic laws, but determinism of their sense requires that all objects be subject to the divine knowledge of what's going to happen. And of course, they still wanted free will because they wanted like Adam and Eve to be responsible for the stuff they do, and us to be responsible for the stuff they do. So what they're going to say then is they're going to say, well, we and our wills are finite, and God's foreknowledge is infinite. And I take this to be sort of similar to Lana's point about the probability, where it's just we have a fundamental epistemic limitation that still exists, and so like there's just because finite is not like our finite wills are not infinite doesn't mean that they're not real in the stuff that they can do. And so maybe this is like a determinism is necessary for free will kind of view. And then so you instead of saying that free will is merely a practical notion, you say that there's a super metaphysical realm of like infinitude and the divine foreknowledge. And it's also the case that we're not going to know all the deterministic laws today that govern us. And so I'm curious whether you see the resulting kind of free will there as a compatibilist view or as a libertarian view. And I'm especially curious because the self in this view is it's a folk view, it's a religious view, but it's a really long established and well I see it as a kind of in between notion of self. So I'm curious where you're going to classify that.
Yeah, particularly in like religious accounts, or particularly monotheistic ones. I mean, yeah, the way I presume scholars reconcile it, I mean, it's just that, I mean, merely because God is omniscient, I mean, it does not entail that, I mean, your behavior is determined in some sense. I mean, it's like, because, I mean, we're looking at it from the perspective of like, okay, well, but whatever is in the future hasn't happened yet, so there's no way that it can really be determined by me and me alone if someone already knows it. But I mean, the typical answer is just, well, God exists outside of time, so it's like a illogical application of causal processes. I think it's still libertarianism. I don't think it reaches compatibilism until you genuinely just say, like, something caused my soul to do whatever. Yeah.
I want to bring a thought experiment that one of my professors likes to write about. So, say that there's only one person in the entire world. The world came into being with just one person. Does that one person have morality and moral responsibility?
Say it again.
Say there's only one person in the entire world. Does that one person have morality and moral responsibility?
Right. I don't know what you're asking. Are you asking like metaphysically, does it exist, or?
Or do you think that person would say that they have morality and moral responsibility?
I mean, presuming that, I mean, this is the person with a very similar DNA to us, yes, they would think this and say this.
In both ways, morality and moral responsibility?
Yes, I mean, there are no other humans to apply it on, but I mean, they can like come up with counterfactuals in their mind. What if there weren't another person like me, and I guess I help them or they help me, or I punch them or something,
Right.
and they'd be like, okay, that's morally good, that's morally bad, etc.
So you think morality exists independent of other people?
It's not completely independent. Obviously, it's socially constructed, but
Right.
I mean, yeah, the convergence of any moral ideas are indicative of a psychological component embedded in DNA. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Are you a determinist?
Do I believe everything is determined?
Yeah.
It's a metaphysical question, so I'm going to have to answer it.
Call it there.
Oh, there, that's great.
Thank you.